When several men kidnapped her from her home to demand a ransom, Sarah felt unspeakable fear for her life and the life of the baby in her womb. But when they were deep into the forest, a wolf came out of nowhere and did the unthinkable. One quiet night, Sarah Peterson turned off the lights in her apartment before she got into bed by herself. This was a routine she'd grown accustomed to in the wake of her husband's demise a few months ago. Tired and ready for another day to end, the recent widow nestled into her bed, seeking solace in the silence that surrounded her. Little did she know, the tranquil night was about to take an unexpected twist. As the clock's hand inched towards midnight, a sudden crash shattered the silence. Startled, the sleeping woman's eyes shot open, fear coursing through her veins. The disturbance echoed from the far reaches of her apartment, perhaps the kitchen. The realization sent a shiver down her spine as her instincts screamed danger. Swiftly, she rose from her bed, urgency propelling her pregnant form into action. Panic danced in her eyes as she sought a refuge for herself and the life growing within her. The wardrobe, which would have been a good hiding place, felt impractical in her current condition. Armed with a bat, Sarah positioned herself behind the bedroom door, heart pounding in sync with the ticking clock. The intruder advanced further into the room, oblivious to her concealed presence. Seizing the opportune moment, she slipped away, prioritizing escape over confrontation. Yet, fate had other plans. Outside her room, she encountered more adversaries looming in the shadows. The chilling realization struck her as she was whisked away into the night, bundled into a vehicle that sliced through the quiet darkness, its destination unknown. The vehicle rumbled through the city until the urban landscape gave way to the foreboding embrace of the forest. Enveloped in a web of fear, the pregnant woman clutched her swollen belly protectively. In the heart of the cold and shadowy woods, Sarah found herself surrounded by menacing strangers. Fear clung to her like a shroud as they pushed her out of the vehicle and dragged her inside a tent. The man who seemed to lead this ominous group approached Sarah, his voice carrying a threatening edge. He claimed her husband owed them a substantial sum of money, a debt they insisted on collecting through her ransom. Distraught and bewildered, she vehemently denied any knowledge of her husband's involvement with these rough characters. To her, her husband was but a humble farmer, tending to crops and livestock, far removed from the shadows these strangers cast. She clung to the belief that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. However, her pleas fell on deaf ears as the strangers remained resolute in their demands. As the night wore on, the men momentarily abandoned the tent where they held Sarah captive. The air inside the tent still vibrated with tension as they indulged in drinks outside, their laughter echoing through the forest like a sinister melody. As Sarah huddled in the corner, she realized that this could be her chance to break free from the clutches of her captors. After a few hours of drinking, the men succumbed to the heavy embrace of sleep, leaving Sarah with a window of opportunity. With cautious steps, she eased herself from the confines of the tent, the cool night air offering a brief respite from the stifling fear that had gripped her. As Sarah tiptoed away from the tent, her heart drummed in her ears, echoing the rhythm of the fear that gripped her. The sleeping men remained undisturbed. Fortunately, luck was on her side this time, and the men continued their drunken slumber, oblivious to her daring escape. As soon as she was out of their immediate reach, she unleashed a burst of speed, her pregnant belly protesting against the abrupt exertion. Yet, fear served as her fuel, propelling her forward through the thick underbrush. Breathless and weary, she pushed herself to the limits, the adrenaline drowning out the fatigue that threatened to weigh her down. Even though she was exhausted, the urgency to put distance between herself and the ominous campfire fueled her determination. She pressed on until the forest enveloped her in an eerie symphony of rustling leaves and distant whispers. When her legs could carry her no further and her breaths came in ragged gasps, Sarah stumbled upon a small clearing bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The ground beneath felt cool against her aching limbs as she collapsed, exhaustion claiming her like an unwelcome companion. As she rested against the twisted roots of an ancient tree, the fatigue overcame her, pulling her into the embrace of sleep. However, she was abruptly awakened by a warm and wet sensation on her face, panic seized her as she opened her eyes to find a pair of gleaming eyes staring back at her. A wolf stood over her, its tongue still moist from licking her face. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she braced herself for the worst. The wolf, however, seemed to defy the fears that lurked in her imagination. Instead of becoming aggressive, it lay down beside her, its body radiating warmth that cut through the chill of the night. Bewildered and cautious, the terrified woman watched as the wolf nestled beside her and locked its eyes with hers. Tentatively, she reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed against the wolf's fur. Surprisingly, the creature didn't recoil, but leaned into the touch. As weary as she was of that apparently tame predator, Sarah felt grateful for the silent companionship forged in the heart of the mysterious forest. As Sarah lay there, she was unable to find solace in the embrace of sleep again. The night lingered on, each moment weighed down by the dread of being discovered by the menacing men who had held her captive. Exhaustion anchored her to the ground, preventing her from attempting to run again. With the first light of dawn painting the sky, Sarah's eyes lingered on the familiar presence beside her. As it stirred and rose to its feet, a hint of vulnerability surfaced. When it took a few steps, Sarah noticed for the first time that the creature was limping. She observed in awe as the wolf moved gracefully away from her despite its injury, disappearing into the depths of the woods. Unknown to her, the creature had been a target of the same group that sought to harm her. It had been hunting when the poachers attempted to claim it, and a bullet had grazed one of its legs in the encounter. She was still pondering the surreal meeting with the wolf when her contemplation was abruptly interrupted by approaching voices. Fear gripped her heart as her worst fear materialized. The menacing men entered the clearing, their eyes narrowing with malice as they fixated on her. In that moment, the pregnant woman clung to the hope that a miracle might intervene, sparing her from the impending danger. As the men advanced, a sudden roar rent the air. The unexpected sound jolted both Sarah and her would-be assailants, freezing them in a moment suspended between fear and confusion. From the shadows emerged the wolf, its teeth bared and eyes ablaze with primal fury. The tables turned, and the men found themselves on the brink of panic. The wolf moved with calculated grace. Its presence alone seemed to wield an untamed power that commanded respect from even the most ruthless. In the face of the wolf, the men's menacing intentions crumbled like a house of cards. Panic seized them, transforming their predatory gazes into fleeting glances of terror. Fueled by a primal fear that echoed through their bones, they fled in disarray, leaving behind the clearing they had once believed to be under their malevolent control. Sarah, caught between fear and awe, watched as the wolf stood triumphantly. As the men vanished into the shadows of the forest, the wolf turned its attention back to her. She hesitated, a mix of gratitude and wariness lingering in her gaze. Though the creature had saved her from the clutches of danger, its wildness remained a mystery that invoked both fascination and fear. Still, the wolf exhibited no hostility towards her. It communicated silently, urging her to follow. With cautious steps, Sarah trailed the limping wolf through the woods, a silent understanding binding them in the wake of shared danger. The creature led her to the edge of the forest, where it paused before disappearing into the depths once more. The pregnant woman, alone but no longer captive, stood at the threshold of the unknown, grateful for the guardian that had emerged from the wild to guide her to safety. Regaining her bearings in the aftermath of the tumultuous night, Sarah cast a searching gaze through the dawn-lit forest. With a heart full of gratitude, she ventured towards the edge of the wilderness, where the canopy of trees gave way to the promise of help beyond. With a heart still racing from the recent ordeal, she gathered her strength. Spotting a passerby, she approached with a sense of urgency. With a timid request, she borrowed his mobile phone and dialed the authorities with trembling fingers. The authorities answered swiftly, and their reassuring voices cut through the residual fear that clung to the pregnant woman. They promised immediate action, urging her to provide directions to the location where the criminals had once held her captive. As Sarah relayed the details, the authorities mobilized with a sense of urgency. Following the directions provided by the shaken but resilient woman, they embarked on a determined pursuit of the criminals. Through the dense foliage and tangled paths of the forest, they chased the poachers turned kidnappers down with unwavering resolve. The criminals, once concealed in the shadows, found themselves exposed to the stark light of justice. It was only a matter of time before the authorities closed in on the perpetrators who had recklessly violated both the sanctity of the forest and the safety of its inhabitants. The tangled web of deceit that had shrouded their actions was unraveling thread by thread, as the swift pursuit led the authorities to the heart of the criminal activity. With the perpetrators apprehended, balance was restored inside the forest and in Sarah's heart. The authorities ensured that the criminals faced the full extent of the law, both for trying to hunt a protected creature and kidnapping a pregnant woman. Sarah, now a witness to the triumph of justice, cooperated with the authorities in building a case against those who had threatened her life and the untamed creatures that roamed the woods. In the courtroom, the poachers faced the weight of their crimes. The evidence painted a vivid picture of their transgressions against both human and wildlife. They were found guilty of their crimes and punished according to them. As the wheels of justice turned, Sarah emerged from the courtroom with a sense of closure. The alliance forged between a pregnant woman and a limping wolf had transcended the darkness, leaving behind a legacy of resilience and the triumph of justice over exploitation. In the aftermath, Sarah returned to her life, forever changed by the events that had unfolded in the heart of the woods. Despite the trauma, she carried with her the memory of the untamed guardian and the authorities who had responded with unwavering determination. The forest where she had felt powerless for hours had also become a sanctuary where the bond between human and wild had prevailed, ensuring that the echoes of justice resonated through the shadows that once concealed the criminals who had threatened the delicate balance of nature. What a mind-blowing story! What would you do if you were kidnapped and brought into the forest? Would you trust a wild wolf to protect you? Share your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more extraordinary stories.